Welcome to another episode of Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. I am Jack Allen. If this is your first time finding the show, you can go follow me at Kojak Podcast, and that stands for Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence, COJAC. And I'm on there on Twitter and Instagram and all those places. You want to support the show? It's all on my Twitter. But if you could leave a review, that would mean just as much. So I hope you guys are all doing well. I know I haven't been doing as many shows lately. I'm trying to do one tomorrow with the Mount Rushmore crew, but we'll see. You know, when you get a new puppy, it's exhausting. And I think our guy has like anxiety issues. Like he's lives home now. So that's why I'm doing it when she's home, when I used to do it when she wasn't home. But he's just like so needy, dude. He's always crying for us. So Dave and the two Daves, the double Ds. What's up, boys? What's going on? Thanks for coming in. So today's episode, I'm so excited about. I like saw this book. You know, whenever I see an interesting book, I try to find, and they're always hard to find. So I found this one right before there was this website called Z Library. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it before. So Z Library had literally, guys. Like, do you remember my Hitler was a British agent book? It's right. Oh, somewhere over there. Oh, there it is. But I got that book. Odd Man showed it to me. I can't read paper books because I highlight them, and I could never find the PDF anywhere. Z Library had the PDF, so they have everything. And so first the feds, so the Z Library, they start charging. It was free, totally free. They start charging like a service, so you can, if you look up more than 5 books a day, you have to pay like $5.99. And the moment they did that, because they're monetizing other people's work, the Fed seized the website, and then they did something so it was through Telegram, so it was still working. I would just message this bot on Telegram. It would send me all PDFs of books, and I got this book, which I couldn't find anywhere, and the Hitler was a British agent book, and then the Feds took that one. So now I'm out of, but luckily I got those 2 books. So anyway, the book that we're doing is called Opium Inc. How Drugs Financed the British Empire. And opium has a not a special, a unique place in my heart because of my past with drugs. And so I was just amazed just learning about it. So we're just going to jump, right in here. And I always thought too, like in ancient times, so the oldest poppy goddess statue in a dress that looks like a homecoming dress of today. It's the earliest depiction of opium symbolism. It's about 3,500 years old, and she's part of the Minoan pantheon. And I didn't know Minoan. It's the top Minoan god is half man, half bull. Minoan, Taurus. So I never put that together, but that's Minoan. And the poppy goddess would become the Greek goddess of grain and harvest. Ancient Egypt has writings about poppy as a cure for crying children. Well, duh. Yeah, it definitely would cure crying. It just put them asleep. I hope you cover FDR. That's probably later, Jonah. This is going to be a multiple part. But you're right. That's how that built his family. FDR's family was the opium trade. But yeah, so the Egyptians talked about how it was a cure for crying children. Homer talks about how it works as a medicine, but it also numbs the spirit as much as the body. And so in this island of Greece where this poppy statue was, or one of the small islands there, they would have suicide parties when you got 60 years old. They say, all right, you're 60 years old now. You can't walk. Join the suicide party. And they'd have these huge shindigs, and they would drink opium, hemlock, and wine. It was like a mixture, and it was like a funeral party, and they would party and then die. I mean, that's the ultimate party. I always tell Liv, if I have an incurable disease, I don't want a colostomy bag. I don't want to poop out of a bag. I don't want you to have to wipe my butt. Go down to Kensington Avenue. That's where all the drugs are in Philadelphia. Get me as much as you can for like $100, and I'll write a suicide note so the cops know it wasn't you. So I get this Greek suicide party. This totally makes sense. That's what I would, if they became a drain on society. Damn, Carl. See, Carl, I don't know if we can talk about, I'll take it off YouTube maybe, but Carl said he dabbled in 78. See, I was just, dope, Carl. So that's interesting. I wonder how Carl, was it popular in your circle in 78, or was it a very small group of people, like small people that are interested in it or whatever? But anyway, Alexander the Great, his armies possibly brought opium to India and trading with groups along the way. And I never knew this, dude. So Marcus Aurelius, I work in like a business world. Marcus Aurelius quotes are like Michael Scott quotes. I mean, they're everywhere, right? He's got so many quotes, motivational quotes, blah, blah, blah. Well, Marcus Aurelius, he was a great man. He was the emperor of Rome. Like I said, he was a philosopher. He became a god emperor. He killed his son-in-laws when they threatened to take the throne from his son. But he was an insomniac, and he suffered from chronic pains in the stomach and chest. He would split blood. He was very melancholy, lacking humor. But as he got older, he detested his body. I guess that would be hard. You're this powerful Ultraman, and you're getting weaker. You're getting older. He detested it. So what did he find solace in? Well, his doctor, Dr. Aulus Galenus, or Galen, he was the most famous doctor in Europe, or in Rome. And he prescribed this medicine, opium like drink, as a cure-all. And most likely Marcus Aurelius was an opium addict. Carl, I meant like, the groups of people, percentages wise, do you think more people doing harder drugs today? Like, was it just kind of like a once in a rarity? Somebody had it. I have a lung disease and several surgeries. Yes, dude, you should absolutely stay away from opiates. Everyone should stay away from opiates. That would be, I was a connoisseur. So if you can't accept my referral, I say, go ask around. Wouldn't dabble in it. Wouldn't even try it once. That would be my recommendation. But yeah, so you definitely, I've been curious about old school, with the pipe and the opium den. Well, dude, Skeptic, what is it, like Made in New York with De Niro? Gangs of New York? I don't know. It's a movie with De Niro, and the first scene, it's a kind of, I didn't really like the movie, but the reason why I watched the movie is the first scene, they're smoking opium in an opium den. And like I think the movie takes place in like the 1900s. And it's just crazy in New York that opium dens were all over until I think like 1920, late 20s, when they passed that drug and alcohol law. But prior to that, dude, I mean, and after that too. But okay, I know I always do. I like talking to you guys because there's so few people that you can in the real world that enjoy talking about anything but football and yeah, I don't know what else they talk. I guess pop culture. Dave, I smoke helps me get along. I get it, Dave. I get it. That's good. It comes. See, never mind. I'm going to just keep going off. So, okay, we're going to continue. So Marcus Aurelius, big opium addict. India. It was in the early 16th century, the man who found the Mughal Empire, which sounds like Mughal, but it's not Mughal Empire. He would dominate. The Mughal Empire dominated parts of India for centuries. And his name was Babur. He was the first emperor. He was a descendant of Genghis Khan. That was his great-great-grandfather on his mother's side. I mean, what a genealogy, dude, to say like, and it's just crazy. I wonder what he looked like, because I wonder if he looked really Indian, or was he kind of a mix between Indian and Asian? It was probably fast, just so crazy. But so he was the guy that built this empire, the Mughal Empire, and he would suffer defeat after defeat. But eventually, 20 years later, he conquers Delhi, taking the name of his ancestors. And that's why they're called the Mughals, because they're the Mongols, the Mughals. So not the Mongols, but the Mughals. And he was given a wink and elbow to his great-great-grandfather. I just found that crazy. But he was addicted to opium, blacking out on wine, the special drink called Majun. And it was part drug, part candy, made of ganja, milk, sugar, and poppy seeds. I mean, that's a cocktail, right? Genghis Khan had, David, you're not the first person I've seen that. Genghis Khan had red hair, for people just listening. Just interesting. Please don't forget, Joe Biden's great-great-grandfather was the East Indian Trading Company. I never knew that. How about this for you, Jonah? The East India Trading Company was starting by the Pirates of the Caribbean, aka the many Templars. So I found that interesting, that Templars became pirates, and the pirates started the East India Trading Company. So we're kind of continuing along on my Templar theme that we've had for the last 20 episodes I've done. Opium easy to grow. Yeah, Carl. And so poppies are opium plants, but the ones in America, I guess they genetically modified them, so there's no opium in them. So lame, so stupid. But anyway, all right. So yeah, so Babur, he started the Mughal Empire. And another use for Indians, So he was they used the opium for their royalty and people that had money, but they would also, for the emperors, if they wanted to have a hunt a lion, they would go catch a lion, dose him with opium, go put him out like where they knew they were taking the emperor, and then he would shoot and kill the doped up lion. So, pathetic. But what like, who would have bummed, dude? You have to drug a lion to kill him. I mean, not that I could kill a lion, but I'm just saying, how does that make you feel good? Or maybe you didn't know, you just thought he was like a crack shot. Opium was the way to deal with hunger and pain in India. These poor messengers, they didn't have like a mail system. They would carry letters hundreds of miles, and they would power themselves on nothing but water, rice, and opium. And so the Portuguese, they're the first to sweep eastward looking for spices. This is like 15th century, which caused the Muslims to militarize because they kept interfering with their trades on the coast. And we're not going to get into this episode, but India has, since the 1500s, I don't know. See, the book doesn't go prior to that, so I'm just going to say 1500s. They have been battling with the Muslims forever, and that hate still exists there today. Excuse me. Sorry, like on LinkedIn. There's a lot of Indians on LinkedIn. They will battle with, I read the comments just like I do on Twitter and Instagram, and they will battle with the Muslims from Pakistan. Like, they hate them. The Hindus hate the Muslims. And it was the same. This is a long standing feud. At least the book doesn't go pre 1500 in India. I imagine it's going on for at least since the Muslims took power in like the 700s there, 500s. So the Portuguese, though, they were the first to build first European to build a base in China to sell drugs. So Dutch East India Company, guys. So I'm also audiobooking a book on the East India Company. So I'm learning. It coincides exactly with this book. So it's like worked out perfectly for me. But just the Dutch East India Company briefly, because I find they're the first conglomerate. We'll get into it. We'll get into it here. So the Dutch learned from the Portuguese. They learning the synergy of profits and violence. Of course, trade cannot be maintained without war, nor war without trade. That's one of the quotes. And the Dutch kicked out the Portuguese in 1663 in India and obtained a monopoly on the pepper and opium. This was one of the first monopolies in history. And I wonder, maybe you could make a argument for the silk trade with China. They had a monopoly at one point, but this is a first, I guess, in the more recent new world. The Dutch East India Company obtained a monopoly. I mean, we have monopolies today. I mean, I guess they're not true monopolies because like Standard Oil was broken up, but could you imagine though, like literally just one company running, so much of trade? I mean, I guess it's Amazon, dude. I guess it's an Amazon with the military, right? And I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's just continue. So they would export opium from Bengal in Southeast Asia. Late 17th century, opium trade popped off, okay? Blew the lid off. Not to China, but to Dutch-controlled ports in the Philippines and other Indian trading towns. And by the end of the century, opium trade exports 43 times higher than in the beginning. And this was only the start. The 18th century, listen to this, dude. The 18th century, on average, 112,000 pounds of opium were being exported from Bengal. So 11 million pounds total. Some went to China, but this is just a drop compared to what would happen. So the first globalist corporation, the Dutch East India Company, was the first drug cartel. They were the Sinaloa cartel, except Sinaloa wiped out every cartel in Mexico, and it's only the Sinaloa cartel. And the first one, though, the world had ever seen. And by 1745, the Dutch East India Company tries to monopolize the opium trade, creating a private group called the Opium Society. Now, that's a hoodie you would want to wear. If you were a member of the Opium Society at the Dutch East, that's a shirt. You better have an awesome crew neck, maybe like a quarter zip. I can definitely see people rocking that. And yeah, Skeptic. Jonah meant FDR's family and another guy who started Skull and Bones. Who's the other guy that started Skull and Bones with? That's how they got their money too. Odd man would know if he was here. So their first director was this guy, Jacob Mosel. Now, he had 2 times the amount of shares than anyone else and got a 10-year deal to hold the monopoly. They agreed with India and Indonesia because it was to curb smuggling. So they signed these deals. They would never have signed these deals if they wasn't there, all these smugglers going around their trade routes. So to own the monopoly, they had to work with the countries that had the smugglers. So they said, all right, we'll give you this much money, or we'll pay you this to use your opium. And so this is what you'll see too. The East India Company did the same thing because it's easier to track flies with sugar. Not what's the saying? Bees with honey. You know what I mean? You can't just fight everybody. You have to work with these people, especially in these cultures that are so totally different than yours. So, yeah. So, and this here, I know I'm going to keep saying, like, can you believe this? But I have that theory about Prince William of Orange and how he was funded. He was funded by the first central bank that happened in Holland in 60 years, 40 years before the Bank of England charter would get pushed through, but they funded William of Orange to overthrow his father-in-law, to institute the Bank of England, kind of sealing the deal for the end of Britain. And so, but of course, Prince William, the Orange family, became a shareholder in the Opium Society, reaping dividends in the opium trade. I'm sure and granted, this doesn't make you a bad person, right? In this time period, do you think they knew that you were going to get I'm sure they knew you could get addicted. Do you think they knew the extent of that? They probably did not. It was weak-willed or whoever. It was definitely not as taboo, I'm imagining, as it is today. So I just found that interesting, though, that the Orange family also made their money selling drugs. Eventually, though, the Dutch East India Company, due to corruption, lots from the opium group, collapsed in the 18th century, but a new behemoth was about to take its place. Yeah, the Dutch East India, I bet the smugglers were also on the payroll. All of them, dude. Eventually, the smugglers, they couldn't stop them. The East India Company, there were just too many of them. They just said, listen, we'll take it for you. Just pay us a fee and we'll take it for you. And we'll get to that too. So yeah, the smugglers definitely controlled a lot. I'm curious about the trade routes during the Bronze Age. Lots of copper came from Michigan to Europe, which fueled the Bronze Age. Ooh, David, definitely. If you have like a book, I would love it. All right. So the British develop a taste. So opium was becoming all the rage, known as laudanum. Okay. It was created by an English doctor, Thomas Sydenham. And before he created this tincture, opium was available in pill form, and it was consecrated by apothecaries who mixed it themselves. And just like heroin, just like street drugs of today, these pills were varying in concentration. So old, Mr. Thomas down the road's got way better opium pills than what's a good British name? Johnson. I don't know. You guys get the joke. Doctors at the time knew it was addictive. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, this time they did. I'm sure back then they knew it was addictive, but I don't think they knew the degree. I would be interested to see opium addiction, how similar it is to heroin. Even though opium is in the heroin getting you high, you're adding chemicals, you're adding adulterants. What does a plant that I'd be interested to see is the withdrawal as bad? Is it as like brutal as it is? Or is it exactly the same? But so this Dr. Sydenham, he would combine sherry wine, cloves, cinnamon, and opium, and made it free. And it was made freely in Europe and England. Like, he didn't have a patent or anything. He showed people how to do it, and it spread all over. They also made another guy, Dover's, made powder. So there's two like forms of opium you get. So the most popular medicines in England and Europe for 2 centuries was opiates. 2 centuries, and you get that if you've done opiates. They are. You can see why so many people are addicted. So I'd say with 6 months, someone would be able to tell, my guy. I'm sure they absolutely would be able to tell. But I don't know. Again, I don't know if they attribute that, but regardless, neither here nor there. So there were many, many, many opium magic medicines available in grocery stores. No doctor prescription was needed. And when the East India Company came to India, most of the personal storage had one or more of these miracle cures. So all the sailors on the ship, like, it was everywhere. It was so widespread. People kept it in a bottle and like in their pocket, especially people traveling like this. And so the EIC, the East India Company, had very humble beginnings. They were English merchants. Well, they were originally Caribbean pirates, which probably had some Templar ties, if not Templars themselves. But then we're going to just say they're English merchants. They were jealous of the Dutch success, and they said, dude, let's just do this ourselves. And they said the Dutch, they got the Spice Islands, fine, let's go to India. And so they have textiles in India. This is before they really knew the opium value of India. And India had spices, textiles, jewels, and soon enough, the East India Company is outpacing the Dutch. And slowly they set up forts along the Indian coast. Now, there is a lot that goes in between that and setting up the forts. But this book's, like I said, is about the opium aspect, not the opium wars and the East India Company. But I'll throw in, pepper in some info that I remember that hits my brain from the audiobook I'm listening to. But in 1683, an English soldier gets killed in India, and they didn't have the power to start the war. That was also what I thought was amazing. In the beginning, I mean, obviously, the East India Company was relatively small. I mean, they had more advanced technology. They had, but they weren't richer than the emperors of India. They definitely didn't have the numbers, so they had to play along these games. But so this English soldier gets killed. They didn't have the power to start the war, but they came back with all the Britain and the EIC had obviously naval power. They're not known for their army. They're known for their navy. And they came back with overwhelming force. The British with all their ships. Then the Indians, they brought their ships and had to push the EIC. They pushed the EIC out, and they just kicked them out, and they had to sue for peace. And 3 years later, the Brits would send 19 more ships to fight the Mughals. They smashed the British again. And I don't know why I find that amusing, but it's just so, you just think of the East India Company and Britain as untouchable. And even in the late 17th century, the Indians are kicking the shit out of them. So they smashed the British. The company sues for peace once again. And the Mughal emperor, he felt bad. He was like this very old guy at this point, and he was very nice. Like, he was so sweet the way he talked and all these things. But he forgave the British. He said, okay, it's all right. Oh, it's all right. Maybe we started it. You can have back your forts, and here's your prisoners. But the IC learned from this, right? You can't make the same mistake twice. So they became known for working under the rules of the lands they were in, at least at the beginning. And once they got more powerful, things changed a little bit. But they learned the culture. They learned who to bribe. They learned how to get diplomacy with what person, developing relationships, or just and you're going to see a lot of similarities between the psyops of today, the what's that called? Opposition, controlled opposition. EIC did tons of that. So yeah, okay. Sue for peace, developing, blah, blah, blah. And they also did this back home in Britain. So EIC was just bribing everybody. Imagine that. This is lobbying. This is when lobbying really started, and the EIC broke it. It did it all over the world. They would give large cash donations to Parliament, essentially like lobbying, like literally lobbying of today. And the purpose was to maintain their monopoly. Just like Amazon, just like Bill Gates, they detested, this I found interesting, they detested merchants. The small business, they despised them, the IC. They private traders, they said they were worse than pirates. Now, what does this sound like to you? So the EIC, the world's first monopoly, or one of them, a multinational, huge globalist organization, hates small business? No, I don't believe it. Oh, you mean companies that could threaten, that could competition? Well, thank God we're so free market here in America. We don't have that problem. Isn't that crazy? It's just history rhymes over and over again. It's just crazy. I mean, like even the IRS during Schmovid, they attack small businesses, had to close, but you can let the big corporations stay open. They would have gotten right along with the East India Company, which makes me think obviously the same type of people are in charge as that has always been kind of in charge. One guy stood up, like who's the Ian Smith, the guy, the gym owner, an Ian Smith of then. He sues the East India Company. He said, and it was basically free trade versus business. And they wanted to, so once they gets the course. Oh, and what does he say to the courts to get the ruling? He says, free trade is a Christian thing. If we're Christians, we deserve that. So you cannot allow a monopoly to happen in our country unless you're not Christian. You put them in a corner. And what is the court rule? Do you think it went against all the bribes it got from the East India Company? No. They said, well, that's a great point. Free trade is very Christian, but we're trading in countries where there's non-Christians. So it's too dangerous for a Christian like yourself to trade with non-Christians. So the monopoly stands. And they had been doing this, even though these merchants, these Christians in the dangerous non-Christian lands have been trading there for years, decades, but the court ruled against their favor. And it probably helped the East India Company. They loaned the British government so millions and millions of pounds. Again, it's the exact same system we have today, the exact same system. It's just, it's wild. And nobody cares and nobody knows. And they think maybe this is the first time the world's been corrupt. Oh, no, it's been being corrupted for so long, longer than we know. They were allowed to issue short-term bonds, quote unquote, India bonds on the burgeoning London Stock Exchange. The company exchanged large sums of cash, enabling British's military to grow and develop. So they donated millions of pounds to the British government, said, build your military up. This is just no strings attached. This is just a total gift. We just want you to build up your navy, your navy. Right. It's not like the British Navy would use that military to help East India gain footholds or fight battles. No, they did. So they built the military for them to use and to have cover of the crown. And the government happily used that growing military in the aid of economic gain for the company, because they made money too. If the EIC did well, they got more tax money. They got more bonuses. They got more bribe money. And it just sounds like today, how the oil companies today, it's the exact same thing, right? I'm sure you guys can think of other industries. The oil company uses they lobby the government, they pay all this money, they get the U.S. military to build up the banana wars, and that I always talk about, the United Fruit Company, in Guatemala, the U.S. military came down and threw a coup. Well, now why would the U.S. military care if the United Fruit Company can't make their bananas fast enough? Well, because the United Fruit Company is lobbying millions of dollars to the administration. So they're going to fight a war for you. The East India Company did the exact same thing. So East India, I'm just going to call it, I'll try and stick with EIC, because I feel like if I keep saying, I'm going to keep saying it, it's just going to be too long. But the EIC in Calcutta, they joined together in the building of Fort William. Calcutta's in India, obviously. And so William III, Prince of Orange, are my one of my least favorite people. He's in the Netherlands. He becomes the King of England, the Glorious Revolution. I'm sure I've talked about my theory on that, how he was a banker's monarch, and that was the end of the monarchy for England because of him. But in 1755, the East India Company hears the French are preparing for war, baby. And I mean, these two countries, the English and the French, have been fighting forever. Jealousy, envy, and the 100 Years' War. I mean, like literally, these two were such bitter enemies. And the reason why that was, or one of the reasons, they're very close to each other proximity-wise. But I probably talked about this before too, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But England was reconquered in 1066 by Norman Viking descendants. Normandy is in France. The monarchy in England didn't speak English. They thought it was a dirty, poor language. They pushed all the native England Britons into Scotland and Wales. So that's why it's kind of like your cousin or whatever, like your rival, like who's going to, your half brother, your step brother, and he's starting to do real well in life. You have to do real well. You get it though. Whew, okay. All right. And so the French had already stolen a fort a few years earlier, but the EIC thought they'd hit Calcutta or Madras. So even though banned by the Mughals, they built a wall, because the Mughals they don't want a foreign military building a fort in their land. So they said, you can have a factory and a fort, but you can't build like a big old wall around it. They did it anyway. So they started building the wall around their fort, preparing for this French attack. And that current emperor, who I told you about, he was like just so nice, like he's the one who gave them back their forts. He kept saying like, come on, guys, you can't do that. Please don't build these walls. I told you can't do it. You can't do it. And Oh, sorry. I'm reading the economic hitman have been around for a long time. Dude, so true. That's exactly what these people are, Skeptic. That's awesome. That's really good. I thought the title was dope. Oh, no, it's Opium Inc. This one. And I gotta link. I'll take a look at that book scale and Carl. So thank you for that. And so the nice emperor dies. The guy that kept saying, it's okay, it's okay. And his nephew takes over. And like many, this is usually what happens to emperors and monarchies. Their kid is a total psychopath. He found the company's leaders. He marched them away. He pillaged their cities, the Calcutta. The news hit another. But I mean, this guy was nuts, guys. Like he was doing these like rapes. I mean, just if he thought you wronged him in any way, you wouldn't live very long. And it could be even a slight or a perceived slight. He was a psycho, like a literal psycho. But there was another psycho on the British side that was willing to go psycho against psycho. And his name was Robert Clive. He's young. He gets rich quick. He retires from EIC at like 23 or 24. He tries to buy his way into Parliament in the UK, gets caught. He gets broke, goes back to the East India Company, and now he's back here for this part. So he has some Indian allies, the East India Company and the British military, but the French never showed to come attack his fort. So he says, I got all this firepower. I built this military up, preparing for battle. We got to use it. So he only had 2,000 men, but he reconquers Calcutta. Then the psychopath Indian guy comes back to retake the retaken city, but Clive wasn't a stupid psychopath. He attacks in the middle of the night. And even though he is so outnumbered, like 10-1, he attacks in the middle of the night. It spooks the whole Indian military. And also their psychopath leader. Nobody wanted to fight for him. He was crazy. So they saw any sign of trouble in that kind of situation. Well, the leader, the psychopath Indian emperor, he takes off right away. When your leader leaves you, you don't respect him. You don't like him. People are dying. You get out of there, right? That's why it was so important for the monarchy to be shown on the battlefield in these days. It inspired these men because your kings and queens, they're like modern day celebrities. That's the best way. They're like The Rock or I don't know, The Rock, like, wow, I respect this. I like this guy. He's so awesome. And that's how this was. So if you see The Rock, you're in a fight with The Rock and he starts running away. I mean, am I going to keep fighting? No, I'm following The Rock. But the Indian guy is to sue for peace, and Clive had done it again. Like this guy was just a wonder king, a wonderkin. I think that's the word. It's almost like all royalty and political leaders have always been psychos. So true. What he didn't know is they were all sent to New York. Oh, I must have missed something. That's funny. Okay. See, I love reading the chat, and then I wish I had like a little bookmark that I could see where I'm at. News, blah, 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 attacks in the middle of the night. Okay, so Indian Siraj, that was the psychopath emperor Indian guy. He made some enemies in Bengal, and one of these enemies was a kingmaker named Jagat Seth, and they were a money lending family, bankers, really quick too. So we talk the richest bankers in the world. We talk Rothschilds. There was a guy in India, and I don't bring him up in this. It was in my other book. There's books from Europeans that wrote about how they had never, he had more wealth than God. I mean, he controlled so much gold and silver. They said that he was the richest man in the world. And I forget his name. I was driving when I heard this, so I couldn't go and look at his name. But I found it interesting that Europeans wrote this because they know who the Rothschilds are. This is the 1700s. The Rothschilds, though they're not as powerful 1700s yet, they're getting there, right? So I just found that how you don't, when you hear rich people in the world, I mean, India had so much natural resources. And if you control the gold, spices, textile, everything, they have an amazing, they're kind of like America. And except without the gold, I guess. But yeah, so I just found that funny. So anyway, okay, so this kingmaker guy, he hates the psychopath. He paid the EIC $4 million. You know how much money that is today? He paid the East India Company $400 million to fight Siraj, the Indian crazy person. And the British said Siraj here's our nice false flag. The British say, Siraj, he broke our treaty, everyone. We must fight war. It's principle. He broke the treaty. He didn't break the treaty, right? They just said this. So they declared war, and with the British military help, of course, and this 400 milli, the EIC, they install a puppet leader, and they plundered the wealth of Bengal again over the next decade. And this puppet leader would also become addicted to opium, which I'm sure the EIC was very happy to do, because great. Now if you don't know, when you're addicted to opium, when you don't have opium, you're going to be doing whatever you can to get more opium. So if you want to control a puppet leader, that's a great move. I would do that if I was the East India Company. I would say that is how we control a country, is we get the person in power and do this stuff. So the Jaget, they would end up losing all their wealth, even though they donated the 400 million to the EIC. They were, overthrowing the king. They would eventually lose everything, because the East India Company would take everything from them, and they would survive on their British pensions for their services. So opium had been a state monopoly even under the Mughals. In 1688, sorry, one second, everybody. Ooh. Sorry, my dog is, he's just a gift that keeps on giving. Keeps on giving. But so the opium had been a state monopoly even under the Mughals. So there was 4,000 chests of opium a year in 1688. 4,000, and these are huge. Like, think of a treasure chest. That's how many chests of opium were being already sold in 1688. And so there's this big battle, the Battle of Plassey. It's super long. It's during the Opium Wars. The East India Company claimed a monopoly rights in 1773, after they officially took over, justifying as an extension of the old state's policies. What is the opium? I sprinkle opium in my cereal, a breakfast of champions, if you will. Hilarious. Yes, David, the CIA definitely took notes on this. 100,000%. That is awesome. That is awesome. Yes, audio cameo for sure, dude, always. But okay, Battle Plassey. And so they also, the 4,000 chests. So they continued with this. That was the rule. These 4,000 chests was the rule before the EIC really took power. And so the EIC, this is brilliant, guys. This is so smart. So they said that they were going to limit the opium production, continuing with that rule. It's just the same rule of 4,000 chests. Now, why would they restrict production? Well, restricting production, as you know, creates false shortages. And this artificial restriction raised opium prices, and China's demand began to grow at the same time. Opium prices raised 400%. I'm trying to think of stuff they artificially locked today. Diamonds, gasoline, I would say. They definitely they regulate it so it can't be free flowing like it is. They do this all the time. And again, the East India Company was one of the first companies to realize, wow, we have all this demand. It's rising. Let's just keep it at this. We are going to make the same amount of money. We'll just charge up, and we'll make the same exact amount as if we had 8,000 chests at a cheaper price. In 1830, though, they eventually get rid of this rule. But in 1830, the area cultivating opium doubled in size after they gave up restricting. Opium exports were 3 times. Then there's a little decline during the first Opium War. But by 1860, and I had no idea it was this late, 1860, it doubled again. And then 3 years later, it doubled again. So in 1 century, in 100 years, lands devoted to opium production went up 800%. I mean, that's insane, dude. 1 million peasants were cultivating opium on 500,000 acres of land. So, I mean, this is huge. Imagine a company with 1 million workers. That's what the EIC had. They had 1 million people working for them, growing opium. I mean, that is fascinating to me. That's huge. That's the logistics of this. And they figured it out. So to manage these 1 million people and over 500,000 acres of land, they created this bureaucratic behemoth. It's called the Opium Department in 1797. Kind of like how the Dutch had the opium firm or whatever it was called. And the peasants, they obviously didn't have great lives. They had 2 bosses, essentially. They had the Opium Department and the Zamindar. And so, as always, there's immense profits for both those groups above, not so much for the peasants. So the peasants, they would rent the land from the zamindars. They'd pay land tax to the government 4 times a year. That's worse than IRS. 4 times a year, you got to pay taxes. It's insane. That's insane. Imagine if you had to do tax day. Well, our government would be able to handle that. They can barely handle the tax day as it is. Imagine it 4 times in a year. That's probably why they're hiring those 87,000 IRS agents. They're getting ready to tax us 4 times a year. And the farmers, they would have to pay their rents before their harvest could be sold. Now, why would they do that? Oh, well, I don't know, because they're broke. So now they have to they would either borrow money from a moneylender. There's another expense because their taxes are due before their harvest comes in, or they would sell their opium futures like contracts in the stock market at a set much lower price to at least be able to pay for the renting of land, maybe some food. And it was much less than what they would get it for. Sharecropping before sharecroppers were a thing. Dude, you always nail it, buddy. And Flippy, I didn't say hello to you, dude. What's going on, man? I always like you. You always use the salute guy. I think you were the one that told me it was a salute. I didn't know for a while what it was. Okay, so you pay them, blah, blah, blah. And the zamindars, they would charge higher rents for the opium farmers compared to a regular farmer renting land because which is illegal by Indian law, but they ignored it. And the farmers could not read or write, so they had to pay a middleman who would represent them. So at one point, there were 25,000 kadatars. That's not the guys it's Zamindar that owns the land, opium department, and they had katadars. There's 25,000 of these guys representing 700,000 farmers, and the farmers had to get a contract signed saying they could grow the opium, blah, blah, blah. If they didn't, punishment, fines. So just like marijuana today, if you grow marijuana in Pennsylvania, it's illegal. If you have a medical license, you can grow marijuana. How do you get a medical license? You pay for it. How do you grow opium in India? You pay for a license. So again, nothing new. The government has figured out, or corporations have figured out, how do we squeeze every little penny out of these people? How can we tax them? How can we gain a little more money, a little percentage point here or there? Well, let's pick taxes before they have the cash. Let's make sure they need a special permit to grow opium. And let's make sure there's all these rules and regulations and contracts that are way too complicated than just saying, bring your opium here, we'll buy it. Just crazy, right? Soon, some people would fake medical licenses. So some people would fake yeah, that's absolutely true. But oh, thank you, Mark Pyre. I appreciate it, dude. Thanks so much. Oh man, that was the nicest comment, dude. Thank you. Well, this one's a little different. We're doing the Opium Inc. So I hope you like it. But and so all these groups taking advantage of these poor opium farmers. So they're getting taxed out the wazoo. They got to pay 3 different people for the privilege of growing opium. And what else? The East India Company would pay. If you snitched on your neighbor for growing opium without a license and you gave the EIC a call, they would pay you like a huge sum for ratting out these farmers. Could you imagine that though? And it's like the same, like people haven't changed, dude. They're exactly the same. Just kind of like how people were calling on their neighbors and they weren't even getting a financial reward. So imagine if you got a financial reward, how many people would have ratted out their neighbors during COVID? So basically these kadatars, they're just stealing from the farmers because they could read and write. They'd sign contracts and take a cut. So 1 kilo of opium in this time, it takes around 387 man hours. So because I was a heroin addict and I know how opium is gotten, it's little bulbs. The poppy plant, the flower, there's little bulbs that grow. They score it with a little knife with like a few hashes. They wait. The opium would ooze out, and they have like a rag or a bucket, and they scoop out. I mean, it's a very tedious process. You need thousands and thousands of these bulbs. But the farmers, they would lick their knives when they were cutting them. And so most of the farmers were addicted to opium as well. So now these people are being taxed by like 5 people. They're addicted to opium, probably because they just need something to keep going, this back-breaking labor. These poor people, man. I mean, I feel bad for them. Like, it's such a sad, hard life. And we complain today. I mean, dude, just, and it gets worse. Let's just continue. So they would, so the farmers, they grow their opium. It's time to harvest. They harvest. They bring their pot of opium. It's weighed, and they have a person whose job is that checks the purity on the EIC side. And I imagine like some guy like I taste hints of, like I'm sure they would test for purity. If there was anything that wasn't pure or they were iffy about it, they would send it to a lab of the time to be analyzed further. So anything left in the pot, though, was the Kada tar was allowed to take. So the guy that is signing their contracts, who they're paying because he can read and write, is now he's not getting just paid for the contract stuff. He gets the excess opium that the EIC doesn't scrape out of the bowl. And for a fact that these EIC people, I mean, millions of pounds of opium. Do you think they're taking each jar like with a finger or like a razor to get every single thing? No, they're sticking their hand, they're grabbing a huge bunch. Maybe they'll do one more. There's thousands of bowls. They don't have time to scrape out each part. So I'm sure there's a decent amount left in here. And these guys, the farmers, get screwed yet again. So after that, they would compile the opium in that day that was collected or whatever, and it would be sent under armed guard to the nearest opium factory. And I imagine, dude, like the red coats, because the EIC would wear I think they wore British attire. I don't know if maybe they didn't. I don't know. I just know there was red coats in India because that was that other book. But I mean, what does an armed guard look like in the 1700s? I guess you have a musket and a bayonet. What else do you have, though? I mean, I feel like you would need like an army. If you have like $1 million in a caravan, you're going to need a boatload of people because you only got one shot every like minute. So if they overwhelm you, like I feel like if you had a bow and arrow, you could probably take these guys out quicker than they could reload on you. I don't know. I just found that I was just that mental image of a armed guard with opium back in the day. It makes me smile. Like, do they have like funny hat? Like what? Wearing these crazy outfits in hot ass India. And opium was literally running multiple countries' economies. It built England. It literally built England. And 1/10 of the people that worked in the opium factory, 1 out of every 10 people worked in the opium factories in India, in Calcutta. Whole families were employed, wives, children. And when you were listening to this, this part cracked me up too. So say you're a British person, you have a lot of money. You hear, maybe you have some shares in the East India Company's opium trade. And you say, honey, we're going on vacation. Bring the kids. We're going to India. And you go to India, and you know what you could do in India? Well, you could go take a tour of the opium factory. Who would put that on their itinerary? Baby, you're going to love this. The kids are going to love this. We're going to go see people roll around this black sticky substance and just see what they do with it. It's crazy. It's going to be so exciting. I'm kind of joking, but it's just imagine today you with your family and you're on vacation and you say, honey, bring the 5-year-old and the 8-year-old. We're going to a pot lab. They're going to love it. Like, what is a kid going to want to know with a opium factory? Opium built railroads by the Chinese. Absolutely, dude. Oh my God. Wool and 100, dude, I sweat like so easily. I don't know how those people, and so I always like, if I sweat, I stink, I'm just like a potent man. My wife, though, South Koreans have this weird gene where they don't smell. So like she doesn't have to wear deodorant. They don't really sell deodorant in Korea. They do, but for foreigners, not for them. But I read this article because I was thinking back in the day, like, dude, I would reek if I had to wear a wool long like jacket in 100-degree heat marching. But this article said like, because we use like those, this fake crap, and if you stopped using deodorant, like within like a month, you would stop smelling. Your body wouldn't produce the smelly BO things that make you smell. So I found that interesting. Screw the Coors factory. Let's go get some samples. That's hilarious, dude. I guess that's what, David, that was a really good point. It's kind of like when people go to the Guinness factory. So I take back what I said. Honey, we're going to the opium factory. Liv, let's get going. But that's a great, Dave, thanks for that helped me rationalize it. Okay. we got way off track there. But so they would take it to the opium lab with the armed guards. They put into jars, then into wooden drawers where laborers would knead the stuff with their hands. Then they would pour that into big vats, and then more workers would get in and they would knead the opium with their feet, which, wow, wow, dude. I just imagine, like, I don't know, this is going to be so mean, but I imagine like poor peasants and their feet are in my opium. Ugh. Thank God you're just smoking it, right? I guess better not to think about it. And so then they would take enough opium, roll into huge head-sized balls, and I have a big head. So I'm at this just full of, this is opium. My head is opium. And which would be wrapped then around in opium leaves. They would make around 70 of these heads a day. They would flatten them eventually into cakes, about one every 4 minutes. And this was probably, a few kilos. So a lot of money, a lot of opium, 0.1 of a gram would be probably enough to get you feeling good back then. Okay. They would let them rest for 2 to 3 days. Wool doesn't smell as bad as cotton. Huh. Tam jam with my dope? That's hilarious. Wool is actually a perfect sock for many reasons. Oh, I don't think they wore socks in the opium pits, though. Stop eating poison labeled as food and we won't smell so bad. Jonah, I bet you're right, dude. I bet that's part of it. You're absolutely, absolutely right. Or synthetics are even worse. Interesting. I've heard that, Flippy. I don't even know what, I don't know what this is. So I should look into that because, your skin's the largest organ on the body. And now someone said that to me, like when you put suntan lotion on, your skin eats it. It's like if you put it in your mouth. So if you wouldn't put it on in your mouth, don't put it on your skin. And that helped me really so we have like fancy shampoo and stuff like that because, and I don't use sunscreen. I use iodine. Not that I'm in the sun very often, but 60 workers for every 10,000 head balls. And when the whistle blew, each man was carefully searched. Pinches were worth a lot, dude. You could snag a little, put in your armpit or something. The factory went to the extent of washing you down with water and the workers as they left. And all that opium that stuck to their bodies, their belly button, that would be worth something. But they would collect that and make what they could. It would drain into their drain. It would catch, the holes were only big enough for water to go down or whatever. And they would collect that opium too. So what's better than toe jam opium? Shower opium coming out of people's crevices. But this was crazy too. This was so nuts. So a boy after, okay, it doesn't matter. These chests would be filled. So they would fill these mango wood chests. Okay. These chests were built by the same opium factory people. It's like another division, right? They worked at the opium shop, but the box making part of the shop. They would weigh 60 kilograms. So 122 whatever pounds. So pretty heavy. And the brand was called Patna Opium on the side of the box. Patna Opium, guys, was McDonald's. It was Coca-Cola. It was a brand that was recognized all over the world. Anywhere the British traded, if you showed a peasant, they would know Patna Opium brand. Isn't that insane? Crack flavored opium, David. That's awesome. Oh, that was the best joke. That was good. But yeah, they would imagine that. It kind of reminds me of American Gangster. He's like the line Denzel Washington. He's like, Blue Magic. That's a brand name. It's like Pepsi or Coke. So if and he's talking because a guy is calling his stuff Blue Magic, but it isn't real Blue Magic. That was Patna Opium, dude. It was a recognized world all over the world. Then to the auction after it was in the mango boxes, it was sold to the highest bidder, and whatever didn't sell, that was sent to China on private ships. There was 2 auctions a year in Calcutta until the 1820s. A steam engine gets invented, then it's once a month, and American traders were banned until the 1830s. I think they were mad at the Revolutionary War, but then they gave it up. So Canton, China was an opium port, and the entire route was reserved for these merchant opium vessels and other merchants. But when they're forced to stop, they were forced to stop at all these toll booths to make sure along the way to make sure the whole crew is accounted for, because China is they don't want foreigners like this, sneaking in China, blah, 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 blah. So if you had an animal, you had a person, whatever, if they died on your travels to China, You had to keep the dead body, the dead animal with you, because each toll booth you had to say, they say, you're missing one. They say, oh, he's in that box over there. And they would go double check to make sure that you have another person or someone didn't escape off your ship. Imagine if someone jumped off the ship, say they didn't want to do it anymore. I think you'd be like screwed. I would go back and get that guy. I wonder if mango wood was used because it was plentiful, or did it did something to the opium, like it was stored? Ooh, that's a good stuff. That's a really good stuff. A good question. Like oak barrels for wine. Yeah, they didn't mention anything, but it was either it was either plentiful, like you said, or you're right. It was there was a benefit to maybe it helped it last longer, flavor it. 67 fees had to be paid from India to Canton, China, to get your opium there. And translators were on each ship. The translators at first spoke Portuguese, but as the British took over and started to dominate, it would eventually go to English. And the smuggling, they also took routes. They had less fees to pay, more money to make. Just like anything, if you have an industry there and there's an ability to have a black market, smugglers, a black market will be created. Just like the drug war, and I don't want to get into that discussion whether it's right or wrong. It's probably wrong. I don't even want to get into it, but just like that, it creates black markets. When you made alcohol legal, it started the Al Capone mafia. And so lots of brothels on the way up the Pearl River leading to Canton, and barbers. And I didn't know this. So in China, they had very strict rules on your haircut, kind of like North Korea, I guess, if that's real. But so the barbers would be like floating around in the boats. They were everywhere. Like imagine taxi drivers outside of a airport. That was barbers. And so you would get a barber, you'd get a cut. They'd tell you where to go, where the best brothel was, where the good food was, where to avoid, or maybe they hustled you. But I found that like barbers were the taxi drivers of the day, the concierge of like a hotel, and also there was all these shops at these little port towns, ways on the port town to Canton. And so it's so funny because if you were a new customer, you would go into a shop, they'd be very nice to you. They would give you a free silk handkerchief for buying something. They tell people, oh, he's a new customer, be nice to him. If you didn't buy something, they would tell all of the shop owners and you wouldn't be able to get served. And they'd be horrible dicks to you. So yeah, and it would take the East India Company 4 to 5 months to unload and restock to unload, to like make a trip to China and leave and get back was 4 to 5 months. So a long time. So we're almost done here. We got just short 2 pages left, but smugglers. So we were kind of mentioned about almost as bad as the New Jersey Turnpike. Damn, you guys are on fire today with the jokes. Those are hilarious. I love the crack flavored opium. That was awesome. I love as bad as the New Jersey Turnpike. And I think Tim had something too that made me laugh. Oh yeah, the toe jam with my dope. Damn, you guys that's hilarious. That's like a punny jokes. I love punny jokes. Okay, so beginning of the 19th century, the bigwigs of the East India Company, they got wind of horrible news. Horrible news. Did they find out that they are killing millions and ruining their lives? No, that wasn't the horrible news. What they found out was opium was being sold in Macu and Canton, but this opium wasn't coming from the Calcutta, the East India Company. And so they had known the Marathas had been making opium, and they just didn't know at what scale. So they found out much of the farmland in these towns, these kingdoms of India had been dedicated to opium, even had trade networks already established to China. So if you have a monopoly, this is not good news. Mala's opium was better than the East India Company's. It was easier to smoke. It was more potent. So if you're an opium addict, are you going to want to buy the cheaper, better one or the more expensive, less potent one? Right. And so the EIC, like trying to stop the competition from forming, Standard Oil did the exact same thing. I'm sure you guys know this, but so if you had an oil well that was competing with Rockefeller, first he would try to buy you out. You said, no, I'm not going to sell. Okay, so you're not going to sell? Well, then the train track, he built all these railroads. You can't use the railroads, or he would get credits. So he could transport things cheaper than everybody else because he got tax credits from the government to use the railroads. And so eventually he would just he would pin you out. He'd buy the land all around you. He would do these real crooked things and put you out of business. And that's exactly kind of what the EIC is doing. The pun guys that are super famous from Instagram, when they were just trying to throw me a few bumps to get in the door. I don't get it. I'm sorry, Jonah. It's hard to read sometimes, but maybe I missed something. But okay, sorry guys. We're almost. I hope you're enjoying it. I like this episode because opium is such a unique place in my heart, as I mentioned. So the mall they had a little different storage process. That would add years of shelf life to the opium. I mean, these guys are like the pot growers of today. They'd get the water from a certain well, and which would give their opium a certain flavor. This well had a certain element maybe that made their opium taste better. It reminded me though, of the fancy bagel shops in New York. Like, oh, that's why these bagels are so good. Or the pot growers that, use only whatever, orange peels to grow, I'm making it up, but I just found that funny. So basically the Malwa opium system was the opium system without the East India Company. But it wasn't a better situation. It wasn't like, oh, here's the commie utopia where the farmers here, they keep all their wealth. No. It was just as horrible, if not worse, than the EIC opium system. They enslaved their farmers the same way. So the British outlawed opium cultivation in 1805. Why are they doing this? Because the British are trying to help the East India Company. Except the problem is they have no direct control over Malwa. And enforcing a monopoly in the 19th century, easier said than done, right? You don't have a surveillance state. How do you control this? How do you stop smugglers? You don't have cars. You're a horse. If somebody left 2 days before you, you're not catching them unless you can cut them off. Well, you can't let anybody know that you're going to cut them off because they're 2 days ahead of you and you have to catch up 2 days. Imagine robbing a bank on a horse when everyone had horses. My God. I mean, if you didn't get shot and killed, if you got out of that door, you're good. No one's getting you. Unless you have like a slow horse. But if you have like a 20-minute head start, over, dude. It's over. And obviously it's not like today where the government can just come in and say, oh, you're breaking these rules, we're going to shut you down. They couldn't do that back then. Not yet anyway. And some even believe the EIC conquered the kingdom because those in power were refusing to block all the opium transport. So they gained more power in the Calcutta and other places purely because those in power didn't stop the smuggling, probably because they were getting bribed from it. So eventually, though, there's this thing called the Maratha Confederacy. So 5 noble families divide up the entire region and formed the Maratha Confederacy. And in the 18th, early 19th century, the British were getting involved with Indian politics. They fought a few conflicts known as the 3 Anglo-Maratha Wars. And the British could win these wars. They did win these wars, even though heavily outnumbered, like insanely outnumbered. It was because these 5 families couldn't get along. They couldn't combine forces, their lack of cohesion. And I'm sure the company had a role to play in this. Oh, did you hear what Johnny said about you guys? I mean, this is what our government does today. They proxy wars, right? And so not that these are proxy wars, but you understand what I'm saying. And yeah. Okay. So the British just would keep winning. And regardless, the British, their lack of regardless, the British would win, but unlike the days of old. So in the olden days, right, and up until this point, you overthrew a country, you installed your leader as their king. Napoleon became your king. King of Spain became the king of Portugal. But the EIC, they learned at this point. They said, you know what? Installing the British throne on the Indian throne, it's going to be more challenging than it will be easy. So why don't we just keep the leaders of the Confederacy around, but we control them? We'll have a puppet government. And that's what the EIC did. This is why the Rothschilds, this is why our, Bill Gates, our lobbyists of corporations of today, they don't want to become King Bill Gates. They don't want to be King Jeff Bezos. That's much more challenging. At least have the facade of a fair system or a facade of your old leader still in power. And it'll keep people content and it'll keep them yelling at him, not the people pulling the strings. So again, the East India Company is brilliant beyond its years. It set up what's going to happen in America, maybe since the beginning, maybe since Civil War. Yeah, exactly, David. Just like today. Just like today. I mean, these guys were brilliant, right? Brilliantly evil. But so for 15 years, they were totally against the opium in Malwa. But the demand for opium was now outpacing the supply in Calcutta. And when you don't shoot a wolf, you domesticate it. That's the quote they used. So they sent a guy, James Taylor, and he's saying, James Taylor, how sweet it is to be in love by you. My dad likes James Taylor. When my dad listens, he'll like that, me singing him. I actually saw James Taylor in concert, but not the same James Taylor. So they sent James Taylor to Malwa to buy opium. This is a hilarious story, to sell in Bombay. So go to Malwa, buy opium, sell it in Bombay. But this guy, he's a junior employee, James Taylor. He hasn't created How Sweet It Is yet. He hasn't hasn't started singing with Carole King, but he's got tons of cash from the EIC, no experience. So this is the set scenario, guys. Imagine maybe it's you, and that's good if it's you. Or maybe imagine your dorkiest, nerdiest, straight edge friend. You say, here's 100 grand, straight edge friend. I want you to go into the inner city of Philadelphia or New York City where it's an open air drug market, and I want you to buy $100,000 worth of drugs. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think your buddy is going to come out with $100,000 worth of drugs? No, he's not. He's not. And so he got robbed a few times, but so he's there, James Taylor, and this big opium firm, Malwa, gives the EIC a call and say, hey, we'll sell you all this opium. We're about to get tons for 75 rupees an ounce. And Taylor said, and that was an amazing deal. The average price was around 90. So, 75, that's way cheaper. James Taylor says, perfect. Now I don't need to keep getting robbed. I'll just wait in my hotel and wait for their call. So a day goes by, another day goes by. They're not hearing anything. And then the EIC finds out it was a lie. This huge firm did that to trick the EIC. They bought up all the opium in the area and sold it back to the EIC for $105 an ounce. So they upcharged them, $20, $30, because they were stupid. But this trick obviously only works once, but they still got over on him. And I'm just saying this story because the opium industry at this time is cutthroat, right? You need to be smart. It's not like, even though it's in India, you would associate, it's like a backwater, less technologically advanced. These people are just as smart, dude. They got over on the brilliant company. And the EIC, they under like thinking lower, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like they thought they were less than they were. Misjudged, but that's not the word. So regardless, Taylor gets out in 1823. A new guy takes over, and this EIC send representatives to each of the kingdoms producing opium to have them sign agreements so that we're allies now. We're not going to, you can smuggle, it's not smuggling now. We're working together. We'll buy it for you. And they aligned all these groups. One group, they said no. And the Scindians, that's what their name was. So this rep, Gerald Wellesley, who's the son of Richard Wellesley, who was the one-time Governor General of India and had conquered more of India than Napoleon did of Europe. And this has nothing to do with our story, but I just found that detail so fascinating that this guy's son, is working with the East India Company while his dad conquered more of India than Napoleon did of Europe. And I've never heard of his name before. Isn't that fascinating? I've seen it around Flippy, but no, it's not. You definitely couldn't go in the city and say, I want opium. I knew a kid that had, but I think it was one time I looked at it, but yeah, it's not prevalent, and I think because you can stretch it longer, obviously with fentanyl or, now the new drugs with heroin and stuff like that. It's not, you don't even need opium anymore to make fentanyl. You can synthesize it purely in a lab. And so it reminds me a lot of what happened to acid and mushrooms. Eli Lilly was the first company to make magic mushrooms and acid. They could only make so much of it, not acid, but they had a special agreement with the government. But regardless, and eventually, though, they realized they could synthesize these things without the fungus. And that was when it really took off. So this is the exact same trajectory opium went on. But regardless, they get treaties from many of these kingdoms, and they had amazing smuggling routes. And the issue was that they'd only get these 6-month contracts. Well, by the time they signed a 6-month contract to stop the smuggling, that the EIC will buy all your opium, you had to start working on the next one. And they gave bonuses for not allowing opium to pass through their kingdom. And they eventually, though, what happens is one of the ultimate smuggling companies, Wellesley, and they go in here and to get them to sign a treaty. And basically what happens is the treaty they signed was that they will pay double the price of what opium costs right now, no matter what, if you don't hit the numbers. And the deal they signed was the kingdom was promising to produce double the amount they had ever produced before. So what the East India Company's contract was literally, we are paying you $100 million. You don't need to grow any opium at all, and we still have to pay you that $100 million. So obviously, this cannot stand. The EIC can't take a risk. What if they don't grow any? What if they just smuggle it all? They're getting paid regardless. They don't care. It was free, totally free revenue. And so the EIC said, okay, maybe it's better. Let's stop doing this. We're done doing it this way. So instead, they said they stopped the treaties, and the East India Company went the route of, they got control of Bombay, and they got control of Bombay, and they said, you just have to pay us a tax every time you want to come through Bombay. We'll take your opium to China for you. You pay us a fee. And that became the cheapest route, because everyone else, you have to pay these merchants tons of money, to sail from India to get to India to China. But this way, it was much easier. You just dropped it off in Bombay, boom, bada bang, and that was it. And so they monopolized the opium industry that way, or another way they did it. Okay, perfect. This is our last page here. I was going to stop, but this is going to be 5 minutes. So I never knew this. So in 1662, the Portuguese, they owned Bombay, and they gave it to the British as a wedding present. And listen to this. The Arthur Wells, any relation to Arthur? I'm a skeptic. I butcherized his name. It's not like Wellesley, though. It's Wellesley. So not Wellesley, it's Wellesley. But maybe it's a British guy who wrote the book. Maybe he spells it different. I don't know. But anyway, so the British get get Bombay as a present. Could you imagine getting a huge island as a present? And so Catherine, she was the Portuguese princess, 23, arranged to marry the ruler of England. And she was lived a very quiet and closeted life. Her dad died early. She was in a nunnery, wasn't out partying. Let's say that. And so at the time, the reason why Portugal did this is because they lost their French ally. They were in a war with Spain, and England had just returned King Charles II after the Glorious Revolution, after Oliver Cromwell was overthrown and the Republic was tossed out. But behind the razzle dazzle, the razzle dazzle wedding, these two countries worked out a deal. So the English got 2 million crowns, territories of Tangiers in Africa, Bombay in India, and in return, the English would provide naval support for the war against Spain. Issue, well, that sounds like a great ally, right? Well, Charles II was this serial adulterer. He had children with many women that wasn't his wife. Catherine miscarried 3 times, almost dying. And, so she was also a Catholic. England is Protestant. So you see, this isn't a match made in heaven, needless to say. But Catherine did, know what Catherine is famous for? What England is famous for. Not opium. What do you think of when you think of England? Tea and biscuits, or whatever they say. Catherine was the reason tea is popular in England. At the time, Portuguese nobles drank tea, not really in Britain. It was drank, but not as much. But Catherine was big. She loved a little sense of mango, blah, 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 blah. And so Catherine was the one that, they all saw her drinking it, then the nobles start drinking it, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when tea took off in England in 1662. Isn't that fascinating, dude? So that's why tea was so popular, because of her. And King Charles didn't even know what Bombay was. He didn't care at all. He leased it out to the EIC for 10 pounds. Yes, 10 pounds in inflation money, that's $100 today, give or take. $100 the EIC was able to lease the island of Bombay. And he literally didn't give a hoot. And also, it took England 3 years to get the island. When the EIC got there, the Portuguese, they didn't hear that they gave up the island. So they said, no, you can't come in. And in 3 years, many of the people on the ship died. it was all a total communication mess. And Bombay lends itself to shipbuilding, export and cotton exports to Britain and China. It fueled the city's growth. And they had minimal control, unlike Calcutta and Bombay. They were surrounded by the Maratha Confederacy. But because of such a strong navy, no one could penetrate this island's defenses. And bringing us back, this is where they allowed everybody that used to be a smuggler to take their opium, sell their opium. They would buy it from you and transport it to China. So that is the show tonight, guys. Wow, yeah, Cha Fly Land, Tea by Sea. I love it. That took it down, Skeptic. That was a good one. So that was the show, guys. We had a pretty good crowd. 18 people were here. So I hope you guys learned. This was just part one. We're going to get even deeper into like the opium wars and what else happens. We're just building the base. But as far as base episodes go, I thought this one was pretty good. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you, Dave. And Dave lost 8 pounds. Congratulate. That's awesome, dude. Way to go. Way to go. But yeah, so I'm Jack Allen, everybody. Anyone new listeners at Kojak Podcast, COJAC Podcast, Flippy, Annika, Skeptic, Carl, David, Jonah. Thank you guys. You rock. So, and Skell, thanks, dude. All right, guys, take care. I may be on tomorrow. I don't know. I haven't been getting much sleep because of my dog, and finally I'll get some sleep. So we'll see. I'll let you know. Take care. Jack Allen, Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. Thanks, guys. Peace.